They came expecting to harvest a world of primitives who had barely crawled out of their gravity wells. The hegemony's war computers calculated a 99.97% probability of total human extinction within the first solar cycle. Their armada stretched across 3 star systems, a living constellation of death that had consumed 1,000 worlds before Earth even knew aliens existed. But, the hegemony made one critical error in their calculations. They assumed that a species capable of splitting atoms for weapons before achieving interstellar flight was simply suicidal. They didn't understand that sometimes, the most dangerous prey is the one with absolutely nothing left to lose. By the time the sun rose on the second day, the galaxy would learn why humanity had earned its place among the stars not through wisdom or diplomacy, but through the simple, terrifying fact that when cornered, humans don't just fight back, they fight until there's nothing left to fight with, including themselves. This is the story of the day 17 became legend, and an armada learned that sometimes the smallest pack has the biggest bite. Captain Sarah Chen watched the tactical display with the kind of calm that only comes from accepting death. The hegemony armada filled her screens like a plague of metal locusts, each ship the size of a city block, stretching in perfect formation across the darkness between Earth and Mars. 3,000 vessels of war, each one carrying enough firepower to crack a moon. Her destroyer, the UES Defiant, was one of humanity's finest. In any reasonable universe, that would have meant something. Today, it meant she had slightly better sensors to watch the end of everything she'd ever loved. "Captain, we're receiving surrender demands on all frequencies," reported Lieutenant Hayes from the communications station. His voice stayed steady, but Chen could see his hands shaking. Good. Fear meant he understood the situation. "Let me guess," Chen said, settling back into her command chair. "Unconditional surrender, complete disarmament, and immediate submission to hegemony rule?" "Yes, ma'am. They're also demanding we power down all weapons and prepare for boarding parties." Chen laughed, a sound with no humor in it. "Boarding parties. They think we're going to just roll over and show our bellies like beaten dogs." The bridge crew exchanged glances. They all knew what the records said about worlds that surrendered to the hegemony. The lucky ones were strip-mined to bedrock. The unlucky ones became examples. "Ma'am," Hayes continued, "they're also broadcasting what they call educational materials about the fate of species that resist hegemony expansion." The main screen flickered, showing images that would haunt humanity's nightmares for generations, if there were generations left to have nightmares. Glassed worlds. Cities that had been turned to radioactive craters. Populations that had been processed. "Turn it off," Chen ordered quietly. "We've all seen the intelligence reports. We know what they do." Commander Marcus Webb, her executive officer, stepped closer to her chair. "Sarah, what are your orders?" "The fleet's waiting for direction." Chen looked around her bridge. 17 ships. That's what remained of humanity's once proud United Earth Navy after the surprise attack on Luna Base and the massacre at the Jupiter shipyards. 17 ships against 3,000. The math was so ridiculous it was almost funny. "Open a channel to all ships in the fleet," she said. "Channel open, Captain." Chen stood up slowly, straightening her uniform. Somewhere, in the depths of space, her parents were probably huddled in a civilian evacuation shelter on Earth, listening to emergency broadcasts and praying to whatever gods they still believed in. Her sister was stationed on Mars, assuming the Red Planet's defense grid was still operational. Her nephew had just turned 5 last week. "All ships, this is Captain Chen aboard the Defiant. I know you're all looking at the same tactical display I am. I know you're all doing the same math. 3,000 ships against 17. Those aren't fighting odds. Those are extinction odds." She paused, watching the alien armada continue its inexorable advance. Beautiful, in a way. Like watching a perfect machine designed for ending worlds. The hegemony is offering us surrender terms. They promise quick deaths for military personnel and integration into their empire for civilians. We all know what their integration looks like. We've all seen the reports from Proxima Centauri and New Geneva. On her tactical display, she could see the 17 green dots that represented humanity's last stand. The UES Defiant, a heavy destroyer bristling with railguns and nuclear torpedoes. The UES Revenge, Admiral Morrison's flagship, a dreadnought that had been the pride of the fleet before today. The UES Indomitable, Captain Park's cruiser, fresh from the yards at Titan. 15 other ships, each one representing thousands of hours of human engineering, millions of credits, and the hopes of an entire species. I've been thinking about something my grandfather told me once. He fought in the old wars, back when humans only killed other humans. He said that sometimes, when you're facing impossible odds, the only honorable thing to do is make the enemy pay such a price for victory that they'll think twice before picking another fight. The communication system crackled with incoming transmissions from her fleet. Not words, just acknowledgments. They understood. The hegemony expects us to surrender because resistance is illogical. They expect us to calculate the odds and make the rational choice. But here's what they don't understand about humans: we've never been particularly rational. We're the species that invented nuclear weapons before we invented interstellar flight. We're the species that fought 2 world wars over ideologies. We're the species that climbed out of our gravity well with chemical rockets held together by determination and stubbornness. Chen walked to the forward viewport, looking out at the armada that had come to end her species. Each ship was a marvel of alien engineering, sleek and deadly and absolutely confident in its superiority. They probably had officers aboard those ships studying human psychology, trying to predict surrender patterns and resistance duration. They probably had neat little charts showing the expected casualty ratios and timeline to total capitulation. "Here are my orders," she said, her voice carrying across 17 ships and into the void where humanity was about to make its last stand. "We're going to give them a fight they'll remember. We're going to make them bleed for every meter of space between here and Earth. We're going to make them pay such a price that when they tell stories about the day they conquered humanity, they'll remember that we didn't go quietly." She turned back to her bridge crew. Hayes was crying silently at his station, but his hands were steady on his controls. Webb was checking weapon systems with the methodical precision of a man who knew he was about to die. Chief Engineer Rodriguez was feeding power to the engines, preparing for a battle that would end only one way. They want to harvest our world? Fine. But they're going to have to take it from our cold, dead hands. And when they do, they're going to know they fought humans. The tactical display showed the armada beginning to deploy into attack formation. Elegant patterns that spoke of 1,000 conquered worlds and perfect military precision. They were taking their time, confident in their overwhelming superiority. "All ships, this is Captain Chen. Execute formation Delta 7. Target their command vessels. Make every shot count. And remember, we're not fighting to win today. We're fighting to make them remember that humans don't surrender." The 17 ships of humanity's last fleet began to move, arranging themselves in attack formation. It was beautiful, in its way. Like watching a pack of wolves decide to charge a forest fire. Lieutenant Hayes looked up from his communications console. "Captain, the hegemony is demanding an immediate response to their surrender terms." Chen smiled grimly. "Send them a message, Lieutenant. Tell them that humanity has considered their generous offer, and we have a counter-proposal." "What should I tell them, ma'am?" "Tell them to go to hell. And tell them we'll see them there." The bridge erupted in grim laughter. Outside the viewport, the alien armada continued its advance, 3,000 ships of death coming to end humanity's brief moment among the stars. But, somewhere in the darkness between them, 17 ships began to accelerate, their crews singing old songs and preparing to show the galaxy what humans were really made of. The UES Defiance engines came online with a roar that shook the bulkheads. In the distance, the armada that had blotted out the sun waited with mechanical patience for humanity to make its choice. Humanity had chosen. The first human ship to die was the UES Courageous, a light cruiser that had been built in the orbital yards above Europa. Captain Martinez had pushed her too far ahead of the formation, eager to draw first blood against the alien fleet. The hegemony responded with the kind of casual precision that spoke of 1,000 conquered races. A beam of pure energy, violet white and terrible, reached across space and touched the courageous amidships. The cruiser simply ceased to exist, vaporized so completely that there wasn't even debris. One moment she was there, engines blazing defiance against the darkness, and the next moment there was only empty space and the expanding cloud of particles that had once been 350 human souls. Jesus Christ, whispered Lieutenant Hayes, staring at the tactical display where the courageous icon had simply vanished. Stay focused, Captain Chen commanded, though her own voice was tight with grief and rage. All ships, continue the attack. Make them pay for Martinez and her crew. The remaining 16 ships pressed forward, their weapon systems charging and targeting computers painting the enormous alien vessels with deadly intent. The hegemony Armada responded with the methodical efficiency of a machine designed for extermination. More beams lanced through space, seeking human ships like the fingers of an angry god. The UES Indomitable took a glancing blow that vaporized her forward section, but Captain Park somehow kept her in the fight, her remaining weapons still firing as atmosphere and bodies spilled from her broken hull into the vacuum. The UES Vigilant exploded in a ball of nuclear fire when a hegemony torpedo found her reactor core. The UES Independence managed to ram one of the smaller alien escorts, taking both ships in a collision that lit up space like a new star. But humanity was fighting back with a ferocity that was clearly unexpected. The UES Revenge, Admiral Morrison's massive dreadnought, had closed to knife-fighting range with one of the hegemony's command vessels. Her railguns hammered the alien ship's shields with a steady drumbeat of depleted uranium slugs, each impact sending shockwaves through the enemy's hull. Their shields are weakening, reported Chief Gunner Thompson from the Defiance Weapon Control Station. Whatever they use for defense, it's not designed for this kind of sustained punishment. Chen nodded grimly. Humans had always been good at violence. It was perhaps their most reliable talent. Target their shield generators. Let's see how they like fighting naked. The Defiance main battery spoke with a voice like thunder. 6 railgun rounds, each one weighing 3 tons and moving at a significant fraction of light speed, reached across space and hammered the hegemony command ship. The alien vessel's shields flared and died. For the first time since the battle began, human weapons touched alien hull. The depleted uranium slugs punched through armor that had been forged in distant suns, tearing into the alien ship's superstructure like bullets through paper. Atmosphere vented from the wounds, carrying debris and what might have been alien bodies into the cold embrace of space. First blood, Chen said with savage satisfaction. All ships, concentrate fire on that target. Let's show them what happens when they pick a fight with humans. The remaining human fleet converged on the wounded alien ship like sharks drawn to blood. Railguns and missiles and particle beams hammered the massive vessel from all angles. The hegemony responded by bringing more ships into the engagement, but they seemed confused by the humans' tactics. Commander Webb studied the tactical display, watching the flow of battle. They're not used to this, he said suddenly. Look at their formation. They're designed for methodical, overwhelming firepower against stationary targets. They don't know how to fight an enemy that charges straight at them. Chen felt a wild hope beginning to bloom in her chest. Are you saying we might actually have a chance? I'm saying they're making mistakes. And humans are very good at exploiting mistakes. The wounded hegemony command ship finally succumbed to the human assault, breaking apart in a chain reaction of explosions that sent chunks of alien metal spinning through space. But the victory came at a price. The UES Retribution took a direct hit from a hegemony heavy cruiser and simply disintegrated. The UES Justice managed to take 2 alien frigates with her when her reactor went critical, but she still died. 14 ships left. But the hegemony was learning. Their formations began to adapt, their ships moving with less predictability and more caution. They started concentrating their fire instead of spreading it across multiple targets. The UES Valiant died to massed beam fire from 6 alien ships. The UES Steadfast lasted 3 minutes longer before joining her in death. 12 ships left. But the human fleet was also learning. Captain Park had figured out that the aliens' point defense systems had trouble tracking multiple incoming missiles if they came from different vectors. The UES Indomitable, despite her grievous damage, managed to thread a nuclear torpedo through the defenses of a hegemony heavy cruiser. The alien ship died in a ball of fire that briefly outshone the distant sun. Captain Rodriguez aboard the UES Falcon had discovered that the aliens' energy weapons were vulnerable to electromagnetic interference. She detonated her ship's entire stock of chaff and sensor decoys, creating a cloud of confusion that allowed 3 other human ships to close to ramming range. The UES Liberty, the UES Constitution, and the UES Endurance all died in the attack, but they took 5 alien vessels with them. 9 ships left. Admiral Morrison's voice crackled across the fleet communications. The old man sounded tired but unbroken. All ships, this is Morrison. I'm reading massive reinforcements coming from the main armada. Looks like we got their attention. Chen checked her tactical display. He was right. The hegemony was bringing heavy units into the engagement, ships that dwarfed even their command vessels. Dreadnoughts that could crack moons. Carriers that spawned clouds of fighter craft. Weapons platforms that existed only to end worlds. Admiral, she said over the comm, recommend we fall back to the asteroid belt. Use the rocks for cover. Negative, Captain. We hold here. Every minute we keep them busy is another minute for Earth's evacuation fleets to get clear. Chen felt her heart sink. She'd been hoping that somewhere, somehow, civilian transports were carrying humanity's children to safety among the stars. But, looking at the tactical display, at the sheer overwhelming mass of the hegemony fleet, she realized that there was no safety. Not anywhere. The alien reinforcements opened fire from extreme range, sending beams of energy that could punch through a planet's crust reaching across space toward the human fleet. The UES Defiance caught one of those beams square on and simply evaporated. Captain Wong's voice was cut off mid-transmission as her ship ceased to exist. 8 ships left. All right, Chen said to her crew, her voice carrying the weight of species extinction. This is it. This is where we make our stand. Engineering, give me everything the reactor can handle. Weapons, arm every missile we have. Communications, patch me through to the fleet. Channel open, Captain. Chen stood on her bridge, looking out at the alien armada that filled space from horizon to horizon. Thousands of ships, each one a marvel of technology devoted to ending human existence. But humans had faced impossible odds before. Humans had stood at Thermopylae and held the pass. Humans had charged machine gun nests and stormed beaches under withering fire. Humans had looked at the impossible and said, watch this. All ships, this is Captain Chen. We've drawn blood from these bastards. We've shown them that humans don't surrender, and we don't go quietly into the night. But this is the end of the line. There are 8 of us left, and they've brought enough firepower to sterilize a star system. She paused, watching as the alien dreadnoughts began to deploy their main weapons, energy collectors that would channel the power of stars into beams of pure annihilation. I want everyone to know that it's been an honor serving with you. I want everyone to know that when the last human dies, it will be with a weapon in their hand and defiance in their heart. And I want everyone to know that we're about to show these aliens why humans earned their reputation as the galaxy's most stubborn species. The communications system carried acknowledgments from 8 ships, 8 crews, 8 groups of humans who had looked at extinction and chosen to fight instead of surrender. All ships, this is your captain speaking. We're going to do something that will either go down in history as humanity's finest hour, or as the most spectacular act of stupidity ever recorded. Either way, it's going to hurt. Outside the viewports, the alien armada prepared to end the human species with the casual efficiency of exterminators dealing with an infestation. But the 8 remaining ships of humanity's fleet were moving into a formation that would have made their ancestors proud, a tight spearhead aimed directly at the heart of the enemy fleet. All ships, emergency power to engines. Lock onto their flagship. We're going to ram them so hard they'll feel it in whatever passes for their afterlife. The human fleet began to accelerate, 8 ships carrying the hopes and dreams and desperate fury of an entire species. Behind them, Earth continued to spin in its ancient orbit, home to billions of humans who didn't yet know that their defenders were about to become legends. The human ships screamed through space toward the hegemony flagship like bullets fired from the barrel of desperation itself. 8 vessels against 3,000, their engines pushed beyond all safety limits, their hulls beginning to glow from the friction of particles in the thin interstellar medium. It was glorious. It was insane. It was perfectly, quintessentially human. The alien flagship was a monument to conquest, a vessel the size of Manhattan that had supervised the destruction of entire civilizations. Its hull bore the scars of 100 campaigns, and its weapons could crack continents. The ship's captain, a being called the Dominator Supreme, watched the approaching human vessels with something that might have been amusement if its species had possessed the capacity for humor. 8 vessels, it communicated to its bridge crew in patterns of light and electromagnetic pulse. They believe 8 vessels can challenge the might of the hegemony. Shall we destroy them at range, Supreme? Asked its weapons coordinator. No. Allow them to approach. I wish to understand this species before we complete their extinction. Their resistance patterns are unprecedented. The Dominator Supreme had conquered 47 worlds in its career. It had seen species surrender with dignity, others fight with desperate courage, and still others simply curl up and wait for death. But it had never encountered a species that seemed to become more dangerous as their situation became more hopeless. The humans' tactical responses were becoming increasingly unpredictable, their attacks more creative and vicious with each engagement. Aboard the UES Defiant, Captain Chen watched the alien flagship grow larger in her viewports. The massive vessel was beautiful in its terrible way, all sweeping curves and crystalline protrusions that caught the light of distant stars. It was also bristling with enough weapons to reduce a planet to component atoms. Captain, reported Chief Engineer Rodriguez, we're at 115% reactor output. Any higher and we risk core breach. Then, we risk core breach, Chen replied calmly. All ships, prepare for terminal velocity run. This is what we came here to do. The 8 human ships arranged themselves in a tight formation, each vessel's captain making final calculations and saying final prayers to whatever gods they still believed in. The UES Revenge took point, Admiral Morrison's dreadnought leading the charge with her massive bulk and heavy armor. The other ships followed in her wake, using her bulk to shield them from the worst of the alien point defense fire. The hegemony flagship opened fire when the human ships reached what it calculated to be optimal intercept range. Beams of energy that could melt asteroids reached across space, seeking the charging human vessels with deadly precision. The UES Stalwart took a direct hit and exploded, her reactor breach creating a brief new star that illuminated the faces of her comrades. The UES Thunderbolt lasted 30 seconds longer before joining her in death. 6 ships left, but they were so close now that they could see individual weapon emplacements on the alien flagship's hull. All ships, this is Chen. 60 seconds to contact. Make your peace with whatever gods you pray to, and prepare to show these bastards what happens when you mess with humanity. The alien point defense systems were throwing up a wall of energy and projectiles that should have been impenetrable. No sane military doctrine would have attempted to breach such defenses. But the human ships kept coming, their hulls glowing cherry red from the heat of absorbed energy, their armor ablating away in sheets of vaporized metal. The UES Intrepid died when her forward magazines exploded, taking her crew of 200 with her. The UES Dauntless managed to ram one of the flagship's escort vessels, both ships dying in a collision that sent shockwaves through the alien formation. 4 ships left. But they were through the outer defenses now, close enough to see the individual aliens manning the flagship's external weapon mounts. Close enough to see the panic beginning to spread through the enemy formation as they realized that the humans weren't going to stop, weren't going to turn away, weren't going to do anything except keep coming until they either reached their target or died trying. The UES Defiant shuddered as a particle beam carved a trench along her port side, atmosphere venting from the wound in a glittering stream of ice crystals. But her engines were still burning, her crew still fighting, her captain still standing on her bridge with death in her eyes and vengeance in her heart. 30 seconds to contact, Chen announced. All remaining ships, target the flagship's bridge section. Let's cut the head off this snake. Admiral Morrison's voice crackled across the communications. Chen, this is Morrison. The Revenge is taking heavy damage. I don't think we're going to make it to the target. Chen could see the massive dreadnought on her tactical display, her hull broken in a dozen places, her engines flickering as power systems failed. But she was still moving, still fighting, still leading the charge toward the alien flagship. Admiral, you've already made it farther than anyone thought possible. If you can't make the run, break off and, negative, Captain. We didn't come this far to turn back now. Besides, I've got an idea that might just work. The UES Revenge suddenly changed course, angling away from the flagship toward one of the massive hegemony dreadnoughts that was moving to intercept the human attack. Chen watched in horror as she realized what Morrison intended. Admiral, what are you doing? Something my grandfather would have called a cavalry charge, Morrison replied, his voice calm despite the chaos erupting around his dying ship. Tell them back home that we went down swinging. The UES Revenge, humanity's last dreadnought, accelerated directly toward the alien capital ship, her reactor overloading, her hull beginning to come apart from the stresses of her final run. She struck the hegemony dreadnought at approximately 12% of light speed. The explosion lit up half the solar system. The alien dreadnought simply ceased to exist, vaporized by energies that briefly matched the output of a small star. The shock wave from the collision tore through the hegemony formation, crippling dozens of ships and sending the survivors reeling in confusion. But Morrison's sacrifice had done more than destroy one enemy ship. It had opened a gap in the alien formation, a corridor of devastated space through which the remaining human vessels could reach their target. 3 ships left, the UES Defiant, the UES Phoenix, and the UES Retribution. This is it, Chen said to her crew. This is our moment. This is where we show the galaxy what humans are made of. The 3 ships dove through the gap that Morrison had bought with his life, racing toward the alien flagship while the hegemony fleet struggled to respond to the chaos. The flagship itself was turning, trying to bring its heaviest weapons to bear, but it was too late. The human ships were too close, moving too fast, driven by something that the aliens didn't understand and couldn't counter. The UES Phoenix took a direct hit from the flagship's main battery and died instantly. The UES Retribution managed to get her torpedoes away before a swarm of fighters tore her apart. But the UES Defiant kept coming, her hull scarred and burning, her crew singing battle hymns as they prepared to die. The Dominator Supreme watched the last human ship approach and felt something it had never experienced before: respect for prey. These creatures were magnificent in their futility, glorious in their refusal to accept the inevitable. It almost regretted having to destroy them. The flagship's point defense systems concentrated their fire on the Defiant, trying to stop her before she could reach ramming distance. Energy beams carved through her hull, venting atmosphere and bodies into space. Projectile weapons hammered her armor, sending fragments of metal spinning through the void. But she kept coming. Captain Chen stood on her bridge, watching the alien flagship grow to fill her viewports. Around her, her crew worked their stations with the desperate efficiency of people who knew they had only seconds left to live. Lieutenant Hayes was singing softly under his breath, an old song about sailors lost at sea. Commander Webb was checking weapon systems one final time, making sure that when they died, they would take as many aliens with them as possible. All hands, this is the captain, Chen announced over the ship's intercom. Brace for impact. It's been an honor serving with all of you. Now let's show these bastards what humans do when they're cornered. The UES Defiant struck the hegemony flagship at ramming speed, her reinforced prow punching through alien armor like a bullet through tissue paper. The collision sent shock waves through both ships, but the Defiant kept going, boring deeper into the flagship's hull, her reactor overloading, her magazines preparing to detonate. The Dominator Supreme had time for one final thought as the human ship penetrated its bridge: these creatures were not prey. They were predators who had simply been outnumbered. The explosion that followed could be seen from Earth. When the light faded and the debris stopped falling, the hegemony armada found itself facing something unprecedented in their long history of conquest: doubt. They had brought 3,000 ships to exterminate a species of primitives. They had expected easy victory against technologically inferior opponents. Instead, they had lost dozens of vessels and their flagship to 17 ships crewed by beings who refused to surrender even when faced with impossible odds. The surviving hegemony commanders held emergency consultations. Their war computers recalculated probability matrices. Their xenobiologists studied human psychology with new respect and growing unease. This species was unlike anything they had encountered before. These humans didn't fight like rational beings seeking victory. They fought like forces of nature, implacable and destructive and absolutely without fear. More importantly, the humans had demonstrated something that would haunt hegemony nightmares for generations. They were perfectly willing to die to take their enemies with them. Every human ship had fought until it was destroyed, and most had taken alien vessels with them when they died. This was not the behavior of a species that could be easily conquered and enslaved. This was the behavior of a species that would make every victory cost more than defeat. As dawn broke over Earth, humanity woke to find the hegemony armada in retreat. The aliens would return, eventually. They would bring more ships, better weapons, deadlier tactics. But they would also bring fear, and doubt, and the knowledge that somewhere in this small blue world was a species that had looked at extinction and chosen defiance instead. The galaxy had learned something important that day. It had learned that sometimes the smallest pack has the biggest bite. It had learned that sometimes the most dangerous enemy is the one with nothing left to lose. Most importantly, it had learned that humans, when cornered, don't surrender. They fight until there's nothing left to fight with, including themselves. And sometimes, just sometimes, that's enough.